Usually when we look at a blueprint, say a schematic for a skyscraper or a suspension bridge, there's this immediate unspoken understanding.
Right, you recognize the intention behind it.
Exactly. You see the load-bearing walls, the precise angles, the specific ratios of steel to concrete, and you immediately see the signature of a designer. You don't look at a highly complex, perfectly balanced architectural drawing and think, wow, I can't believe the ink just spilled out of the pen and randomly formed a skyscraper.
No, of course not. That would be absurd.
But, and this is the crazy part, that is exactly what traditional biology asks us to accept when we look at the origins of life. We are taught to look at the most staggering, incomprehensibly complex blueprint in the known universe, which is our own biology,
Yeah.
and assume that it was just, well, a random ink spill that got incredibly lucky over a few billion years.
Yeah, that's the standard model we're all taught.
All right, so today we are opening up a stack of papers that attempts to tear that assumption down to its studs. We're looking at this sweeping, highly controversial, and deeply fascinating framework called the Transdimensional Unified Field Theory, or TDUFT.
And this was put forward by George James Dukas right around 2025 and 2026.
Yeah, and the mission of this deep dive today is to explore his really audacious claims. He argues that Darwinian evolution is mathematically impossible, that life is actually a designed operator system based on the golden ratio, and this is the wild one, that love is not an emotion, but the fundamental physical operator that holds the universe together.
Which, I mean, sounds like a massive leap. The material we are analyzing today fundamentally challenges the core tenets of how we understand physics, biology, and human psychology. Dukas is attempting to unify all of it into one unbroken equation.
If you are hearing these claims for the first time, you might be looking for a quick paradigm shift. Or maybe you're just trying to wrap your head around some massive reality-bending concepts without getting overwhelmed by the jargon. Because how does a physicist justify using a word like love in the same breath as orbital mechanics?
It definitely raises eyebrows.
For sure.
Yeah.
But I promise you, by the end of this deep dive, you are going to look at your own DNA, the ancient pyramids, and even the concept of forgiveness in a completely new mathematical light. So, okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with his direct attack on the premise of Darwinian evolution, specifically life spontaneously arising from random chemical processes.
Right, adaptive biogenesis. So what's fascinating here is how Dukas begins by addressing the sheer mathematical probability of a single functional protein assembling by chance.
Because we need proteins to do literally anything in a cell.
Exactly. In the TDUFT framework, the foundational argument relies on demonstrating that the sequence space of biological molecules is simply too vast for random chemical reactions to successfully navigate.
Okay, let's define sequence space,
Oh.
so we're all on the same page. When we talk about a protein, we aren't just talking about a blob of organic matter, right?
No, a protein is a highly specific chain of amino acids. You can think of the 20 standard amino acids used in life as, well, like 20 different letters of an alphabet.
Okay, an alphabet.
Yeah. And a typical functional protein might be a chain of anywhere from 100 to several thousand of these letters. For the protein to function, for it to fold into the precise three-dimensional shape required to do any work inside a cell, those letters have to be arranged in a highly specific sequence.
You get the sequence wrong.
It doesn't fold correctly. It just becomes a useless, tangled ribbon of chemicals.
Wow. So Dukas actually does the math on this, right?
Yeah.
He points out that the probability of a single functional protein of modest length arising by random chemical assembly is roughly 10 to the power of negative 150.
Which is a number so small it's hard to even conceptualize. To contextualize 10 to the negative 150, we have to look at the physical limits of our universe. I mean, the estimated number of atoms in the entire observable universe is only 10 to the power of 80.
Wait, really? That's it?
Yeah, and the number of seconds that have passed since the Big Bang is roughly 10 to the power of 17.
Oh, wow. So even if every single atom in the universe was an amino acid,
Right.
and they were all reacting with each other a trillion times per second for the entire 13.8 billion year history of the universe, you still wouldn't have enough time or material to randomly shuffle into the correct sequence for one single protein.
Exactly. The number of possible incorrect combinations vastly outnumbers the correct ones. It is literally like trying to guess a 150-digit combination lock by, throwing stones at it from across the room.
That's a great visual. And Dukas argues that at this probability, we've crossed the threshold from highly improbable into physical impossibility.
And remember, that calculation is merely for one isolated protein. A minimal, basic functioning cell requires hundreds of specific proteins, all interacting simultaneously.
Right, and when he calculates the odds of getting a minimal cell to assemble randomly, it drops to 10 to the power of negative 2500.
It just gets mathematically brutal.
But then he introduces the chirality problem. And honestly, this seems to be the nail in the coffin for random biogenesis.
Yeah.
Can you unpack chirality for us?
Sure. So chirality is a property of asymmetry in molecules. The word actually comes from the Greek word for hand, which is why we often just call it handedness.
Like having a left and right hand.
Exactly. If you look at your left and right hands, they are mirror images of each other. They have the same components, 4 fingers, 1 thumb, but you cannot perfectly superimpose your left hand onto your right hand. They are structurally distinct.
Right, if you try to put a left-handed glow on your right hand, it doesn't fit. The thumb is on the wrong side.
Precisely. Amino acids have this exact same property. Because of how carbon bonds form, amino acids can form in either a left-handed configuration or a right-handed configuration.
Okay.
Now, in organic chemistry, when you have a random chemical reaction, say in a primordial soup scenario, the laws of thermodynamics dictate that you will produce a 50-50 mixture of both left-handed and right-handed amino acids. It's known as a racemic mixture.
So nature basically defaults to an equal pile of left and right hands.
It does. Biology, however, is intensely biased. Every single protein in every living organism on Earth is constructed exclusively using left-handed amino acids.
Only left-handed.
Only left-handed. It is a strict requirement for life, which we call homochirality.
It's like trying to build a highly complex machine, but
Yeah.
your parts bin is just this massive random pile of left and right-handed gears. And if you accidentally grab a right-handed gear and slot it into a machine that only runs on left-handed gears, the whole thing jams. Protein can't fold.
That's a perfect analogy. The biological structure fails immediately, and the mathematical hurdle here is immense. To build even a modest protein of 150 amino acids, you have to randomly select a left-handed molecule from that 50-50 primordial soup 150 times in a row.
Which is like flipping a coin and getting heads 150 times.
Yes, and the odds of doing that by pure chance are 10 to the power of negative 95.
So when Dukas aggregates all these probabilities, the cell assembly, the sequencing, the homochirality, he arrives at a total probability for random abiogenesis of 10 to the power of negative 2985.
Which is a mathematician's way of demonstrating an absolute zero.
Wow.
What's fascinating here is the core principle Dukas derives from this. He explicitly states, random does not precede non-random, ever.
So he's saying order has to come first.
Yes. In the TDUFT framework, the universe must emerge from an ordered operator system. Order does not slowly crawl out of chaos over billions of years. What we perceive as randomness or genetic mutation is interpreted as the shadow of a much higher dimensional order that is actually degrading. Biological life was declared at its maximum operator complexity from the very beginning.
Okay, I have to jump in here because if you're listening to this, you are probably thinking the exact same thing I was. If life didn't evolve upward toward complexity, then how do we explain the fossil record?
Right, the obvious counterargument.
Exactly. We have museums full of evidence. How do we explain, for instance, a dinosaur turning into a bird? The traditional view of evolution is like taking a clunky, room-sized computer from the 1960s and slowly upgrading it into a sleek smartphone. How does he explain that transition without upward evolution?
He uses that exact transition to illustrate what he calls adaptive collapse, or de-evolution. Dukas flips the thermodynamic narrative. Think about dinosaurs. For 165 million years, they were massive, extraordinarily complex operator configurations.
Basically huge biological mainframes requiring tons of energy.
Exactly. And maintaining a massive physical structure requires an incredibly specific, supportive environment. The Earth back then was warmer, had different atmospheric compositions, and abundant biomass to fuel these massive thermodynamic engines.
And then the Chicxulub meteor hits.
Right. The environment completely destabilizes. Sunlight is blocked, global temperatures plummet, the food web collapses. In physics terms, the entropic pressure of the environment skyrockets. Energy becomes incredibly scarce.
So the environment could no longer support those massive dinosaur configurations.
No, it couldn't. According to Dukas, they didn't upgrade to survive. They suffered an adaptive collapse.
They shed complexity because they literally couldn't afford the energy to keep it.
Yes. The birds we see today are interpreted as the de-evolved, low-inertia, simplified remnants of that lineage. They are the reductive versions, the only configurations that could survive that extreme entropic pressure. Evolution, in this view, is a mechanism for aggressively selecting for the loss of information to ensure basic survival.
That is such a wild perspective shift. And it makes me think about our own lives. How often do we assume that progress always means adding complexity, when true survival often means shedding it, letting go of the heavy stuff just to make it through the winter?
It's a very apt parallel. In Ducas's view, the overarching story of biology is simplification under pressure. When you realize that 99% of all species that have ever existed are now extinct, that doesn't look like relentless upward progression. It looks like maximum initial complexity slowly winding down.
Okay, but knowing that dinosaurs shed complexity to survive only tells us how the system degrades. It doesn't tell us how it was built in the first place. If life isn't a random accident, what is the actual blueprint? Where is the proof?
This leads directly to the geometry of DNA. Ducas claims the proof is sitting directly in the physical measurements of the human genome. He argues DNA is engineered using precise foundational mathematics, specifically the golden ratio.
The golden ratio. We hear about this in art and architecture all the time. It's denoted by the Greek letter phi, which is roughly 1.618, right?
And its mathematical conjugate, psi, which is negative 0.618. These aren't just aesthetic numbers, they emerge from the root quadratic equation. X squared minus x minus 1 equals 0.
Okay.
They represent a unique geometric proportion where the ratio of a whole to its larger part is identical to the ratio of the larger part to the smaller part. It allows for perfect fractal expansion without distortion.
And Ducas points out the physical measurements of B-form DNA, which is the most common structure in our cells. I was reading this part of the source, and it's mind-blowing. He looks at the X-ray crystallography measurements, the literal physical distances between the atoms.
Yes, measured in angstroms.
Right. The length of one complete turn of the DNA double helix is 34 angstroms, and the diameter is 21 angstroms. And if you divide 34 by 21, you get 1.619.
Which is an incredibly precise match to the golden ratio with only a 0.06% error margin.
That's insane. And 21 and 34 are consecutive numbers in the Fibonacci sequence, too. So Ducas uses this to argue that DNA isn't just a chemical ladder that stumbled into a stable shape. It's explicitly engineered using phi geometry.
And he expands on this by examining the cross-section. If you look at B-form DNA end on straight down the central axis, the structure forms a decagon.
A 10-sided polygon.
Yes. The 10 base pairs that make up one turn project a shape of two pentagons rotated exactly 36 degrees from one another. Ducas focuses heavily on this because a 10-sided radial shape requires two distinct mathematical constants to coexist perfectly.
What are the constants?
Pi, which governs the rotational symmetry and the circumference, and phi, the golden ratio, which intrinsically governs the internal spacing of the pentagons. Ducas calls this intersection the dimensional lock.
The dimensional lock.
Yes. The tenfold symmetry happens because pi divides the circle into 10 equal 36-degree arcs, while phi constructs the physical spacing of the atoms along those arcs. You cannot produce this specific geometric lock through random chemistry.
Wow. And he ties this to theoretical physics, right? Like representing different domains of reality.
He does. In TDUFT, pi represents the continuous rotational wave of what Ducas calls the spiritual or pre-physical domain. He mathematically defines this as the spiritual remainder, which is pi squared minus 1.
Okay, let's pause there. Pi squared minus 1 sounds very abstract for biology. What does that actually mean?
Well, in physics, rotational mathematics describes waveforms, like quantum probability fields. Pi is the foundational constant of rotation. Ducas posits there is a primary uncollapsed waveform to the universe, a domain of pure potential or consciousness. Phi, on the other hand, represents discrete material reality. It governs how matter crystallizes in 3 dimensions.
So wait, DNA isn't just a twisted biological ladder. It's essentially a cosmic antenna.
In this framework, yes.
It physically transforms the unseen rotation of the soul domain, the pi rotation, into the material physical spacing of biology, the phi geometry. It transduces the spiritual wave into the physical particle.
Exactly. It steps down the continuous rotation of pi into the structural spacing of phi, locking them together.
That means every single cell in your body right now is mathematically locked into the exact same operator equation that governs the speed of light. That is wild.
It suggests biology is an integrated extension of cosmological laws, not just an isolated chemical accident.
But it's not just our biology that holds this code. The theory takes a huge leap here. Because if this is a universal law, we should see it reflected in macro structures built by anyone who understood it. Which brings us to the antediluvian architects and, of all places, Mars.
Yes, Dukas challenges the conventional dating of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Based on structural alignment and weathering, he dates it to roughly 15,000 years ago, prior to a global flood.
And regardless of the debate over its age, the math is undeniable. He claims the builders were encoding the exact same dimensional lock we just found in DNA. The perimeter of the pyramid's base divided by its height is exactly 2 times pi.
Which is the mathematical relationship between the circumference of a circle and its radius. They essentially squared the circle in stone.
Right. And if you look at the cross-section, the ratio of the apothem, the slant height to the half base, is phi. The base to height ratio is phi squared divided by 2. It encodes the exact same pi and phi operators.
Dukas argues this wasn't an accident. They deeply understood the source code of reality and built a terrestrial structure to resonate with it.
But then he points out that this identical 16-degree operator and phi geometry is found in ruins on Mars, like actual anomalous geological formations.
Yes, the 16-degree operator relates to how phi and pi intersect at planetary scales. Dukas claims this indicates an extraterrestrial civilization also possessed this math. They had the code, they built with it, and yet...
They nuked themselves millions of years ago.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Dukas introduces the concept of the will to harmony. The universe is sustained by a conscious presence. Civilizations rise when they align with this harmony and fall when they depart from it.
So knowledge of the math doesn't guarantee grace.
Exactly. The Martians had the math but lacked the ethical alignment. They chose power over coherence, leading to planetary collapse.
Wait, so if intelligence and technological progression don't guarantee survival, where does that leave us right now? We're mapping the genome, splitting the atom, playing with quantum physics. Are we just repeating the Martian mistake?
According to Dukas, humanity is at this exact threshold. We are rediscovering the code, but socially and ethically we are highly fragmented. We have power, but lack coherence. The next civilizational cycle depends entirely on choosing coherence. If we don't, the math dictates we will suffer an adaptive collapse.
Okay, but what exactly does choosing coherence mean mathematically? How does a civilization or a person align with the universe? Here's where it gets really interesting, because it brings us to the most surprising physics equation in the entire text.
He locates the exact mechanism of unity in a symbol we use every day, the equal sign.
Which is wild. You'd think the ultimate operator would be gravity or the speed of light, but no, it's the equal sign.
We view the equal sign as passive notation, just a seesaw balancing two sides. But in TDUFT, the equal sign is an active, continuous operator. It is the ultimate act of declaration.
Right, because without the equal sign holding the equation like x squared minus x minus 1 equals 0 together, you just have isolated fragments.
Exactly. The equal sign actively holds distinct elements in shared existence. If it stops, the structure instantly dissolves into chaos.
It's like the universe is a vineyard, and the equal sign is the farmer. The vineyard doesn't just exist on its own. It requires the continuous active presence of the farmer tending to it, or it withers away. The equal sign is the current keeping the electromagnet turned on.
And Dukas gives this a specific name, the love operator. Mathematically, he represents it as a cursive L acting on a system, S. It contains 3 simultaneous actions, a partial derivative, an addition sign, and a multiplication sign.
Okay, let's break that down. A partial derivative, how is that?
A partial derivative isolates one variable while holding others constant. Dukas uses this for the first step, distinction. Before you can unite anything, you have to recognize its distinct boundaries. Love doesn't blur things into mush. It recognizes the individual essence.
Then the addition sign.
That's unification, binding the distinct elements in shared existence.
And multiplication?
Relation and expansion, creating a complex relation that makes the whole greater than the sum of its parts. Love is not a human emotion or a romance. It is the structural mathematical act of dividing to recognize, adding to unite, and multiplying to expand.
Love is the gravity of reality. It is literally the active pre-physical act holding the universe in existence.
Yes.
I mean, just think about how that changes the concept of existing. You aren't a random accident in a cold and different universe. You're actively being held in existence right this second by a mathematical act of love. If that universal equal sign blinked out, you would dissolve.
It's a profound ontological shift.
But if love is a structural physics operator, how does it apply to our messy human psychology?
Dukas maps this through the 5 scales of the love operator, the inner, relational, social, spiritual, and structural scales.
Let's start with the inner scale. He defines self-compassion mathematically. Usually, we think of self-compassion as, taking a bubble bath or not being too hard on yourself. But he says it's the contracting operator, psi, restoring the expansive operator, phi, after it has overextended.
Right. You can't just expand infinitely. Phi is your outward energy. If you push it too far, you lose equilibrium, which we call burnout. Self-compassion is the structural requirement to activate the inward resting psi operator to restore balance.
If you don't, your system collapses. That is so validating. And then the relational scale, this was mind-blowing to me. He explains forgiveness mathematically.
Yes. Forgiveness is literally resetting the relational closure operator, the equal sign after a rupture. It isn't erasing the past or pretending a harm didn't occur. That would violate the mathematical truth of the system.
You can't delete variables from an equation.
Exactly. Forgiveness is the structural decision to consciously reestablish the equal sign despite the altered variables, restoring the structural coherence between two nodes.
Wow. And he even maps out pathology.
Yeah.
Like trauma.
He frames trauma as an operator disequilibrium, where the memory and time operator side dominates the scale. The past is structurally overwhelming the present. The system is locked in contraction and can't access phi to move forward.
When you frame anxiety or relationship issues not as moral failings, but as mathematical imbalances in your operator field, it gives you a totally different, almost objective way to heal. You aren't broken, you just need to rebalance the equation. It's so liberating.
But this raises an important question, which Dukas addresses with a rule called the cascade. The cascade only flows upward.
Right.
You cannot impose societal or structural unity if the individual nodes lack inner coherence. The micro dictates the macro.
You can't build a stable bridge out of crumbling bricks. Well, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We've journeyed from debunking random evolution using the probabilities of protein folding to discovering the golden ratio in our DNA. We explored the ancient ruins of Earth and Mars, and finally discovered that the equal sign is the active physics operator of love, translating all the way down to self-compassion and forgiveness.
It's an audacious theory that insists the laws governing a galaxy are the exact same laws governing human consciousness.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? It means your existence is not a story of separation, but of recognition. As the text says, you have always existed in the mind of God as a held expression. Awakening is just the moment you become conscious of what has always sustained you. I want to leave you with one final, lingering idea to chew on. If mathematics is truly the structural extension of a living consciousness, and you are using mathematics every time you balance your checkbook, build a shelf, or intuitively catch a falling object, are you just performing a mundane task? Or are you, in that brief moment, literally borrowing the exact same consciousness that imagined the universe into existence? Think about that the next time you look in the mirror.